Alright, let's go to part 2. Let's go through the different glands. So the pituitary gland is the first one. It's located in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone. It has two lobes to it. It has an anterior and a posterior lobe. The posterior lobe is known as the neurohypophysis. Hypophysis is an old name for the pituitary gland. And that part is made up of nerve endings that come from the hypothalamus releasing two hormones. The antidiuretic hormone, or also known as anti-P hormone, or sometimes vasopressin. What that does, it reabsorbs water in the collecting tubules of the kidneys. This raises blood volume and therefore influences blood pressure. So vasopressin is a name that comes from the fact that more blood volume will put more pressure on the vessels, on the vascular vessels. And you notice that hormone when you drink coffee or caffeinated drinks and alcohol, because doing those two substances diminish the function of the ADH hormone. And ADH stands for antidiuretic hormone. The oxytocin promotes uterine contraction during labor and also the milk ejection during breastfeeding. So that's known as the letdown mechanism. It plays a role in the sexual arousal and orgasm and is responsible for a feeling of sexual satisfaction. It promotes the nurturing and affectionate feelings and behavior, and therefore it's known as the cuddle hormone. The front of the gland, known as the adenohypophysis, is made of glandular epithelial cells. So the back one is made of neural tissue, the front one is made of glandular tissue. The hypothalamus controls the anterior pituitary gland by releasing or by secreting, releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones. And so when you see a name releasing or inhibiting in the hormone names, then you think hypothalamus. Technical terms for releasing are liberins, they liberate, and statins is the technical term for inhibiting. So the hormones in the anterior pituitary gland include the growth hormone, and that increases cell size and division, particularly in the bone and in the muscle tissue. Another hormone is the prolactin, and that stimulates cell division and secretion of the milk in the mammary glands, and it seems to enhance the testosterone production in males. Then we got two hormones, the follicle stimulating hormone called FSH, or shorthand FSH, and the luteinizing hormone, and the shorthand of that is LH, and they both act on the gonads, on the sex glands. The FSH stimulates the maturation of the follicle in the ovary and promotes the sperm production in the males. And the LH initiates the ovulation in the woman and enhances testosterone in men. Then we got the adenocorticotropic or tropic hormone, ACTH, and that works on enhancing the hormone secretion of the adrenal cortex. We'll study the adrenal cortex because the adrenal cortex then secretes hormones that go through the bloodstream on the target glands. So this is like a three-step process to secrete hormones of the adrenal cortex. We have the hypothalamus talking to the pituitary gland, and then the pituitary gland talks to the adrenal cortex. The adrenal gland is right on top of the kidneys. And then that place, the adrenal cortex, the outside shell of the adrenal gland, will secrete hormones. There's multiple, and we go through them. The next one is the thyroid stimulating hormone, and that's a similar situation. It enhances the hormone secretion of the thyroid gland. So again, in the picture on the bottom, you can see that the hypothalamus secretes hormones to the pituitary gland, and then the pituitary gland secretes hormones to the thyroid gland, and then the thyroid gland secretes hormones that function on the body. So many control mechanisms that the system does not overshoot or undershoot. Then the next one, also located in the head, in the brain, is the pineal gland, sort of on the opposite end behind the thalamus, on the opposite end from the hypothalamus in the back. And that gland, there's a pine cone shaped gland, and it's known as the third eye. It secretes melatonin, which is a serotonin derivative that regulates the day/night rhythm and helps in sleep. Its formation is dependent on light, which increases the production with increased production at night. So as the light gets dimmer, more melatonin is produced. Seasons of the year also influences this production. It's a biological clock we talk about. Also that melatonin is. Melatonin is high in children, and what that does, it inhibits the sexual development during that stage. When it drops down, the secondary sexual characteristics will show up in a child or in a teenager. Melatonin is an effective antioxidant and eliminates damaging oxygen radicals, and therefore strengthens the immune system, preventing cardiovascular disease and cancer. It particularly seems to protect the DNA. So it's a very diverse hormone, very cool gland. The thyroid gland is located below the larynx in the front of the neck. It has two lobes that are connected with an isthmus, they call that, a connection place. In the inside, internally, it is divided into lobules that are composed of tubular spaces, and they're known as follicles. Those tubular spaces, they look like pools from our perspective here. And those follicles are lined with epithelial cells, and the thyroid hormone, the TH, it's known as, is stored in the follicle until it's needed. And needed it is when the epithelial cells take it up and release the hormone into neighboring blood vessels. So when the TH is stored in the follicle, and when the pituitary gland says, hey, we need some of that thyroid hormone, it's right there ready, and it can be squeezed through the epithelial cells that surround those follicles, go right into the bloodstream and do the action. And the action is the TH stimulates enzymes concerned with energy production. So the thyroid gland increases the glucose oxidation, the use of glucose in most body cells. So it increases the basal metabolic rate and body heat production. We know that as the calorigenic effect, because if we have an increased metabolic rate in our system, we use more calories in our system. Just basic basal metabolic rate means what happens in the body when you just lay still and you don't do anything. Just the basic rate is necessary. And so sometimes people have problems with weight, and it can be an underfunctioning thyroid gland. Sometimes people are nervous and jittery and stuff, and that can be a function of an increased thyroid gland production. Then the thyroid gland has C cells. They call them the parafollicular cells, and they are within the thyroid gland, but they secrete a different hormone called calcitonin. And that hormone reduces blood calcium levels by promoting bone formation. So that hormone takes calcium out of the blood, or helps the body take calcium out of the blood and put it and deposit it in bones. Then another gland located on the thyroid gland, not within it, but in the rear of it, in the back of it, are four lentil-shaped little epithelial cell clusters that are known as the parathyroid glands. And they stimulate osteoclasts to break down bone tissue and release calcium into the bloodstream to raise levels of calcium. So the C cells in the thyroid and the parathyroid glands work antagonistically against each other, or they work with each other, so to speak. One helps raise the calcium in the blood, and one helps calcium go down, decrease calcium levels in the blood. The calcitonin tones blood calcium levels down. That's how I remember the two. Because it's always going to be a little bit tricky. Who does what? And we get confused. So the calcitonin tones blood calcium level down.